All right, so this week we're moving into the development of Christology, which is called the Arian controversy. We began with the Apostolic Age. We've spent a couple weeks in the patristic period and patristic age. And now we're moving into the Arian controversy, which resulted in the First Ecumenical Council, and we'll talk about what ecumenical councils are, but it led to the First Council of Nicaea. And this is during the Imperial age of the church. So we've moved from Apostolic age, from patristic age, and we're now going into the Imperial age of the church. Before we get into the weeds with the Arian controversy and Christology, as well as the Imperial age of the church, I thought I would just open up with this brief video clip discussing the background of all the key players during the working out of this controversy and central to the results of the Council of Nicaea. First, I must illuminate the political situation of the time. At the close of the 3rd century, the Imperial age of the church is in the 4th century, early 4th century. At the close of the 3rd century, you start to see a Roman Empire that's beginning to teeter and weaken. By the time you get to the early 4th century, you have 3 persons who are making claims to be emperor of Rome. And that's Constantine, Maxentius, so we're talking very early in the 4th century. Constantine was set to engage a true legend. The day prior to the battle, Constantine looked up in the sky and saw a cross bearing the inscription "In hoc signa vinces," which means by this sign you will conquer. Later that evening, while he was sleeping, legend says that Christ came to him with the same sign and commanded him to make a likeness of that sign and use it as a safeguard in battle. The next morning, Constantine woke up, fashioned a cross to his shield and the shield of his soldiers, and at the end of the day, Maxentius was dead, and Constantine had conquered Rome. This was a turning point for the church. For after this time, the church would no longer be enemies of the empire, but would become a significant influence and instrument of the empire. In 313 AD, 1 year after the Battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine and Licinius, who were co-ruling the Roman Empire at the time, issued an edict called the Edict of Milan. This Edict of Milan recognized legitimacy of all religions, including Christianity. As a result, Christianity received special favor from Emperor Constantine, partially because of his religious experience, but also because Emperor Constantine saw that the nature of the Christian faith, namely open policy of accepting all that come in faith, was a way to solidify the empire. So Constantine began to financially strengthen the church and make Christian beliefs a part of everyday life in 5 specific ways, and I want to go over those. Number 1, he did it through funds and gifts. Constantine began to funnel state funds away from pagan worship or non-Christian worship to Christian communities and Christian churches instead. This included special building projects, the confiscation of pagan temples, and transforming them into churches, and giving the church some of the best revenue producing lands in the Roman Empire. The second thing Constantine did was he provided exemptions. He exempted priests and other church leaders from public service. The bishops were able to have their own court, and he would allow people to transfer legal cases to the bishop's court if you were Christian, which would put bishops in more power and centers of influence in the larger community. The third thing he did was he enacted specific laws. He enacted laws that restricted pagan worship, but implemented laws that encouraged people to convert to Christianity. In addition to that, the fourth thing is he made some calendar changes. He reformed the Roman calendar to resemble a Judeo-Christian calendar, including a 7-day week, with Sunday being a legal holiday. He also included obligatory days such as Christmas and Easter on the official calendar. And the last thing that he did, which leads directly into some of the controversies that we're going to be speaking about, is that he kind of turned his eye away and ignored or allowed violence. And what I mean by allowing violence is he allowed violence within the Christian community. Ironically, in a move to encourage solidarity within the Christian community, he allowed for anyone who was teaching unorthodox or considered heretical Christian thought to be moved against with violence within the Christian community. We want to take a particular note of this allowance because it led directly to the Council of Nicaea. About 10 years after the Battle of Milvian Bridge, so we're talking about 323 AD, Licinius began to believe that Constantine wanted to be sole ruler. And so after 10 years of co-ruling Rome, Licinius began to be skeptical of Constantine. So when Constantine and his army pursued some invaders that came into Constantine's territory, but then moved into Licinius's territory, Licinius thought Constantine was making a move on his territory. They ended up battling each other. And in 324 AD, Licinius had died, and Constantine was the sole emperor of Rome. Now, while all this political stuff was going on, in the church, you had an evolution in the organization of the church. Early on, prior to the Imperial Church, each city had only one church. And that one church, that one Ephesus, that one community, and that one church building was led by a bishop. And all the bishops were equal. Soon, especially once the church began to be supported by the state, the larger cities became what was called metropolitan churches, all right? Because the larger cities had larger revenue, they had larger resources. And because of their immense size, and due to them being credited as being founded by apostles of Christ, there were 3 churches that grew into very large metropolitans. That is the Church of Rome, the Church of Antioch, and the Church of Alexandria. These churches had more authority than all other churches. The bishops of these churches became known as patriarchs of the church. So in the 4th century, a Christian would recognize the hierarchy of the church to be priests and deacons who serve the local churches and the local communities. And these churches are led by bishops. And the bishops are led by the patriarchs, with the patriarchs being led by the Bishop of Rome. As the church began to grow in number and strength, it became more and more evident that all was not well in the solidarity of theology within the church, specifically about the relationship between God the Father and Jesus Christ. This is where the Arian controversy begins to develop. And in the next part of this week's lesson, we will discuss in detail the Christology of the Arians.